The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut. The patrolman smirked, convinced he had just taken another criminal off the streets. He had no idea the wrist he just bound belonged to the chief magistrate of the district. In moments, that officer's entire career would be over. The wind howling off Lake Michigan cut through the streets of downtown Chicago like a serrated blade, but the chill hardly bothered Honorable Roman Vale. Roman was a man whose presence commanded immediate respect. He possessed a sharp, distinguished profile, silvering hair perfectly trimmed, and the quiet, immovable posture of a man who had spent decades navigating the relentless pressures of the American justice system. As the chief magistrate judge of the Cook County Circuit Court, his word was quite literally the law. That morning, Roman had arrived at the George N. Layton Criminal Court building well before his first scheduled hearing. He had a complex constitutional docket to review involving severe allegations of police misconduct, a subject he took with the utmost seriousness. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal gray wool overcoat layered over a navy pinstripe suit, he looked every inch the legal titan he was. However, upon reaching the heavy oak doors of his chambers, Roman realized he had left his secure access badge along with a crucial leather portfolio in the passenger seat of his Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The vehicle was parked in the restricted, gated subterranean lot reserved exclusively for senior judiciary members and high-ranking city officials. Shaking his head at his own rare moment of forgetfulness, he turned on his heel and took the private elevator back down to the garage level. He didn't know that the morning shift change for the perimeter security detail had brought Officer Blake Hensley to the courthouse. Blake Hensley was a young officer with years on the force and a chip on his shoulder the size of a city block. He was a man who viewed his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a blunt instrument of personal authority. His disciplinary file already contained multiple excessive force complaints, all mysteriously buried by a sympathetic union rep. Hensley saw the world in rigid, prejudiced binaries. In his eyes, certain neighborhoods bred predators, and certain profiles fit a specific narrative. Hensley was patrolling the outer perimeter of the judge's parking structure when he spotted Roman. Through the chain-link division, Hensley's eyes zeroed in on a black man in a dark coat standing next to a luxury vehicle, reaching for the door handle. In Hensley's biased calculus, the elegant tailored suit didn't register as a sign of wealth or status. Instead, it registered as a disguise, or perhaps the spoils of illicit activity. The restricted nature of the parking lot only fueled Hensley's suspicion. To him, a black man alone in the VIP lot at that early hour was an anomaly that required immediate aggressive investigation. "Hey you, step away from the vehicle." Hensley's voice echoed sharply against the concrete pillars of the garage. Roman, his hand resting on the sleek chrome handle of his own car, paused and turned slowly. He looked at the uniformed officer advancing toward him with a hand resting menacingly on his duty belt. "Good morning, officer," Roman said, his voice a rich, resonant baritone that filled the cavernous space. "Is there a problem?" "I said step away from the car," Hensley barked, closing the distance rapidly. He didn't unholster his weapon, but his aggressive posture was unmistakable. He stopped a few feet from Roman, his eyes raking over the older man with undisguised contempt. "Whose car is this?" "It is my vehicle," Roman replied calmly, maintaining direct eye contact. He recognized the hostility in the young officer's eyes. It was a look Roman had seen 1,000 times growing up on the South Side, a look he had spent his entire life and his entire career on the bench working to dismantle. "Your vehicle?" Hensley scoffed, a cruel, mocking smile playing on his lips. "Right. A brand new S-Class in the restricted judge's lot. Do you know where you are, buddy? You're trespassing on secure city property." "I'm well aware of where I am," Roman said, his tone dropping an octave, slipping instinctively into the authoritative cadence he used to silence unruly courtrooms. "I don't care who you think you are or what kind of story you're about to spin," Hensley interrupted, stepping into Roman's personal space. "Show me some ID now." "My identification is inside the vehicle," Roman explained patiently, though a flicker of cold anger ignited in his chest. "If you will allow me to open the door." "Don't you dare touch that handle!" Hensley snapped, lunging forward and grabbing Roman by the shoulder of his expensive coat, yanking him backward. "You're not getting into that car. Put your hands on the hood. Spread them." Roman stumbled slightly from the unexpected physical assault, but quickly caught his balance. He looked at the young officer, his mind racing. He could end this immediately. He could scream his title, demand a supervisor, and watch this arrogant officer shrink into oblivion. But as Roman felt the officer's rough hands patting him down with unnecessary aggression, a different thought took hold. For years, Roman had presided over cases where young men of color testified about being harassed, assaulted, and arrested without cause, only to have their testimonies dismissed in favor of an officer's sworn statement. Now he was experiencing the exact terrifying indignity they described. If a judge in a bespoke suit wasn't safe from blind racial profiling in his own courthouse parking lot, who was? Roman made a profound, instantaneous decision. He would not invoke his title. He would not use his power. He would submit to the process exactly as an ordinary citizen would be forced to, and let Officer Blake Hensley hang himself with his own rope. "You are making a very serious mistake, officer," Roman said softly, as his chest was pressed against the cold hood of his own Mercedes. "Shut up," Hensley sneered, kicking Roman's feet further apart. "You're under arrest for trespassing, attempted grand theft auto, and resisting an officer." "Resisting?" Roman asked, his voice deadpan. "You're giving me lip. That's resisting," Hensley replied, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. He grabbed Roman's wrists, twisting them behind his back with enough force to strain the older man's rotator cuffs and snap the steel bracelets shut. The walk from the subterranean garage to Hensley's patrol cruiser was a public spectacle, exactly as Hensley intended. He marched Roman up the concrete ramp and out onto the street level, parading him past a handful of early morning administrative clerks and janitorial staff. Roman kept his head held high, his expression unreadable. He felt the cold sting of the wind against his face, a stark contrast to the burning humiliation in his chest. I was shoved unceremoniously into the back of the squad car, his knees bumping against the hard plastic partition. The door slammed shut, enclosing him in the claustrophobic, chemically scented rear seat. Hensley slid into the driver's seat, radiating triumphant energy. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. I'm bringing in a 10:15 mail. Caught him trying to boost a vehicle in the secure judicial lot." Static crackled over the radio. "Copy that, 4 Bravo. Need a tow for the vehicle?" "Negative," Hensley replied, glancing at Roman through the rearview mirror with a smug grin. "Vehicle belongs to one of the judges. I'll leave it secured. Just taking the garbage to the curb." The drive to the 12th District Precinct took some time. For the entire duration, Hensley couldn't resist monologuing. "You thought you were slick, didn't you?" Hensley taunted, navigating through the morning traffic, dressing up in a fancy suit. "Thought you could just stroll into the VIP lot and nobody would ask questions. Let me tell you something, old man. I can spot a hustler from a mile away. You people always think you can game the system." "You people?" Roman asked quietly from the back seat. "You know exactly what I mean," Hensley shot back. "Criminals, grifters, you come into our city, try to steal from the people who actually work for a living, who actually build something. You're looking at a felony, buddy. I'm going to make sure the judge throws the book at you." The dark irony of the statement almost made Roman laugh, but he maintained his stoic silence. He was mentally documenting every word, every protocol violation, every casual violation of his civil rights. The patrol car pulled into the rear bay of the 12th District Precinct. Hensley dragged Roman out of the back seat, leading him by the chain of the handcuffs through the heavy metal doors into the bustling booking area. The precinct was chaotic. Telephones rang incessantly. Officers typed aggressively at ancient keyboards, and the air smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and floor wax. At the raised front desk sat Sergeant Elias Crow, a longtime veteran of the force. Crow was a mountain of a man, deeply respected by the brass and feared by the rookies. He was currently hunched over a stack of arrest reports, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Look what I dragged in, Sarge," Hensley announced loudly, practically shoving Roman toward the booking counter. Sergeant Crow didn't look up right away. "Name in charge, Hensley. Make it quick. The system is crashing again." "Caught him red-handed trespassing in the late courthouse secure lot," Hensley boasted, leaning against the counter. "Trying to pop the locks on a new Benz and resisting arrest to the sheet, too." He was getting mouthy. "Uh-huh," Crow muttered, finally stamping a file and tossing it aside. He slowly raised his head, sliding his reading glasses down to look at the suspect. "All right, buddy, let's have your name." The words died in Sergeant Crow's throat. The veteran officer froze, his eyes widening in absolute horror. All the color instantly drained from his weathered face, leaving him looking like he had just seen an apparition. He blinked once, twice, as if hoping the image before him would change. It didn't. Standing before him, hands shackled behind his back, wearing an impeccably tailored but slightly rumpled charcoal overcoat, was the Honorable Roman Vale, the man who had personally sworn Crow in as a sergeant years earlier, the man who presided over the highest profile criminal trials in the state. "Sarge?" Hensley asked, his smug smile faltering slightly as he noticed Crow's paralysis. "You good? Like I said, I need to book him for grand theft auto." "Hensley," Crow whispered, his voice trembling so violently it barely carried over the noise of the room. "What? What have you done?" "What do you mean?" Hensley frowned, defensively crossing his arms. "I did my job. He wouldn't show ID. He was—" "Take the cuffs off," Crow commanded, his voice suddenly rising to a terrifying booming roar that brought the entire booking room to a dead, breathless silence. Every officer, every clerk, every suspect in the vicinity turned to look. Take the cuffs off him right now. Hensley stepped back, genuinely shocked by the outburst. Sarge, wait a minute. He's a felony suspect. Before Hensley could finish his sentence, the door to the precinct captain's office swung violently open. Captain Grant Holloway, a man known for his iron-fisted rule over the 12th District, marched out, a half-empty mug of coffee in his hand. He had heard the shouting. "What in God's name is going on out here, Crow?" Captain Holloway barked, striding toward the desk. "I'm trying to conduct—" Holloway stopped dead in his tracks. His coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor and splashing dark liquid across his polished boots. He didn't even flinch. His eyes were locked in sheer terror on the man in the handcuffs. "Judge Vale," Captain Holloway choked out, the syllables sounding like they were tearing his throat. The name hit the room like a bomb. The silence that followed was suffocating, absolute, and catastrophic. Hensley's heart stopped. The breath vanished from his lungs. The sneer that had been plastered on his face melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He slowly turned his head to look at the man he had just physically assaulted, verbally abused, and dragged through the city in chains. Roman Vale stood tall. He didn't yell. He didn't demand an apology. He simply looked at the young officer with eyes that possessed the chilling, inescapable weight of absolute justice. "As I was attempting to explain to your officer before I was forcefully detained," Judge Vale said, his voice echoing perfectly in the pin-drop silence of the precinct. "My identification was in the vehicle that belongs to me." Hensley's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He fumbled for his handcuff keys, dropping them twice onto the floor before finally managing to unlock the steel bracelets. As the cuffs fell away, Roman slowly brought his hands to the front, calmly rubbing his chafed wrists. "Captain Holloway," Judge Vale said, turning his gaze to the terrified precinct commander. "Your Honor," Holloway stammered, his face pale. Words cannot express. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. I will have this officer suspended immediately. I will—" "Do not suspend him, Captain," Judge Vale interrupted softly. The quietness of his voice was somehow more terrifying than a shout. Hensley felt a brief, desperate surge of hope. Was the judge letting him off? Was he going to show mercy? "I want Officer Hensley perfectly active on the roster," Judge Vale continued, his eyes locking back onto the young, trembling patrolman. "Because when the federal civil rights investigation begins, and when the Internal Affairs Division tears through every arrest report this man has filed over an extended period, I want him in uniform to answer for it. You assumed my guilt based on the color of my skin, Officer Hensley. Let us see how well you fare when you are judged solely by the content of your character." The fallout was not merely swift. It was apocalyptic. The 12th District Precinct had been entirely locked down, transformed from a bustling local police hub into the epicenter of a massive multi-agency federal investigation. Captain Grant Holloway's frantic phone calls to the chief of police had triggered an immediate chain reaction. Before the morning coffee had even gone cold, black SUVs belonging to the Federal Bureau of Investigation had surrounded the building. The doors to the precinct burst open and a swarm of suits descended upon the chaotic bullpen. Leading the charge was Special Agent Quint Ashford from the FBI Civil Rights Division, accompanied by Detective Nate Soren from the Chicago Police Department's Office of Internal Affairs. They did not come for a polite conversation. They came with warrants, lockboxes, and zero tolerance for the precinct's sudden culture of silence. Officer Blake Hensley was isolated in a windowless interrogation room, stripped of his duty belt, his badge, and his sidearm. He sat shivering at the metal table. The aggressive bravado that had fueled him earlier completely evaporated. He was no longer the apex predator of the courthouse parking lot. He was a suspect trapped in a nightmare of his own arrogant making. Agent Ashford and Detective Soren systematically dismantled Hensley's professional life. Officers impounded Hensley's patrol cruiser, stripping the dashcam footage and GPS telematics. His precinct computer and personal smartphone were bagged and tagged, sent directly to the Federal Cybercrimes Unit for immediate cloning and decryption. A separate team executed a search warrant on Hensley's personal locker in the precinct's basement. It was during the locker raid that the narrative shifted from a horrifying case of racial profiling to a massive, systemic criminal conspiracy. The twist that would seal Hensley's fate was buried at the bottom of his duffel bag. Detective Soren pulled out a false-bottom shaving kit. Inside, he did not find standard police gear. He found a tightly bound stack of cash, 3 expensive watches, and a small, meticulously kept black leather ledger. The ledger contained dates, license plate numbers, and dollar amounts. When Agent Ashford slapped the open ledger down on the metal table in front of Hensley, the young officer's face turned the color of ash. The investigation quickly revealed that Hensley wasn't just targeting minorities out of sheer blind prejudice. He was operating an organized extortion and theft ring under the color of law. His specific methodology involved profiling wealthy people of color driving luxury vehicles. He would initiate aggressive, unconstitutional stops, manufacture probable cause for a vehicle search, and quietly pocket cash, jewelry, or electronics before officially logging the arrest. He banked on the horrific reality that the justice system would inherently believe a uniformed officer over a minority suspect, even a wealthy one. Hensley had assumed Roman Vale was just another lucrative target. He assumed the expensive suit and the Mercedes-Benz S-Class meant easy money and a suspect who would be too intimidated by the badge to fight back effectively. He had no idea he was attempting to shake down the very architect of the county's legal framework. "You didn't just arrest a judge, Hensley," Agent Ashford said, leaning over the table, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You arrested the man who signs the search warrants for my division. You handcuffed the man who spent the last decade tearing down corrupt cops exactly like you. You handed us the key to your own prison cell." The story had leaked to the press. The local news stations interrupted their daytime broadcasts with breaking news alerts. Helicopters circled the George N. Layton Criminal Court building and the 12th District Precinct. The headlines blared across chyrons in bold red letters. "Chicago police officer arrests chief judge in racially motivated shakedown." The public outrage was instantaneous and deafening. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, demanding immediate accountability. The mayor held a televised press conference, visibly sweating as he promised a complete, transparent overhaul of the department's hiring and monitoring practices. The police union, usually incredibly aggressive in defending their officers, issued a brief, cold statement distancing themselves from Hensley entirely. The evidence found in his locker, combined with the victim's unassailable credibility, made him entirely radioactive. Meanwhile, Honorable Roman Vale had quietly returned to his chambers. He had declined medical attention for his bruised wrist and refused to give immediate interviews to the frantic reporters camped outside the courthouse. He sat at his massive mahogany desk, reviewing his afternoon docket as if the morning's traumatic events had never occurred. But inside, a quiet, resolute fire burned. He knew that the system he had dedicated his life to was deeply flawed, but he also knew that he now wielded the exact hammer needed to shatter one of its most corrupt cogs. He was not going to let this become a localized scandal that faded quickly. He was going to make an example out of Blake Hensley that would echo through police academies across the country for decades. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but for Blake Hensley, they moved with terrifying, unprecedented velocity. Sometime after the incident in the parking garage, Hensley found himself sitting at the defense table in the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse. The swaggering patrolman was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, terrified defendant wearing an oversized tan prison jumpsuit. He had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk and a danger to the community after federal prosecutors uncovered witness intimidation tactics he had attempted from his county jail cell. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. Every pew was filled with journalists, civil rights attorneys, and off-duty police officers who came to witness the historic downfall of one of their own. Because Roman Vale was the victim and the star witness, he obviously could not preside over the case. Instead, the trial was assigned to the Honorable Serena Langford, a federal judge known for her merciless adherence to the law and her absolute intolerance for corruption. Judge Langford ruled her courtroom with an iron fist, and she had watched Hensley's defense attorneys attempt to delay and obfuscate with growing visible irritation. The prosecution presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Detective Soren walked the jury through the black ledger, matching the dates and license plates to civil complaints previously filed by minorities who claimed they had been robbed by a police officer, complaints that the 12th District had conveniently dismissed or buried. The dashcam footage of Hensley's unprovoked assault on Judge Vale was played in high definition, the audio of his racist taunts echoing clearly through the federal courtroom. But the definitive moment of the trial occurred when the prosecution called their final witness. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom opened and Roman Vale walked down the center aisle. He wore the same bespoke charcoal gray wool overcoat and navy pinstripe suit he had worn on the morning of his arrest. The entire gallery fell into a hushed, reverent silence. Even Judge Langford subtly straightened her posture as Roman took the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. For hours, Roman recounted the events of that freezing morning. He didn't embellish. He didn't raise his voice. He simply delivered the cold, hard facts with the clinical precision of a man who had evaluated thousands of testimonies. He painted a devastating picture of a public servant who had weaponized his authority not out of fear or in the heat of a dangerous moment, but out of cold, calculated prejudice and greed. During cross-examination, Hensley's defense attorney desperately tried to poke holes in Roman's narrative, suggesting that perhaps Roman had moved aggressively or failed to comply fast enough. Roman simply looked at the lawyer, his expression entirely unbothered. Counselor, I have spent decades instructing juries on the legal definitions of compliance, probable cause, and excessive force. I assure you, my hands were clearly visible, my demeanor was entirely non-threatening, and my civil rights were catastrophically violated by a man who believed the color of my skin was an invitation to abuse his power. The jury deliberated for a short time. The foreman stood up and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, federal extortion, obstruction of justice, aggravated assault. Sometime later, the sentencing hearing arrived. Hensley stood before Judge Serena Langford, his hands trembling as he awaited his fate. He offered a tearful, panicked apology, claiming he was a product of a stressful environment, begging for leniency, begging for a second chance. Judge Langford stared down at him from the elevated bench, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy. Mr. Hensley, you were granted a profound privilege when you were handed that badge. You were entrusted with the safety, the dignity, and the constitutional rights of the citizens of this city. You took that sacred trust and you dragged it through the mud for your own pathetic financial gain and your own bigoted amusement. You did not protect and serve. You hunted and exploited. You thought you were above the law. You thought the system would always cover for you. Today, you will find out exactly how the system treats a criminal. Judge Langford slammed her gavel down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. I sentence you to a lengthy term in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. Your pension is officially stripped, and you are permanently barred from holding any position of public trust in the United States. Officers, take him away. The bailiff stepped forward, grabbing Hensley by the arms. As they slapped the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, the exact same way he had cuffed Roman Vale in that freezing parking garage. Hensley looked back toward the gallery. Sitting in the very back row, arms crossed, face entirely impassive, was Roman Vale. He watched in silence as the disgraced, sobbing former officer was dragged through the side door and swallowed by the shadows of the federal holding cells. Justice had not just been served. It had been entirely, unequivocally realized. The system had broken, but a stronger, far more unyielding force had stepped in to correct it. Justice isn't just a concept. It's a standard we must all be held to. If this incredible story of absolute karma, accountability, and the unyielding pursuit of truth resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness about the reality of the justice system. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that expose the truth. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and always demand justice.